I've read hundreds of these cases. War crimes, cover-ups, buried files, and most of them, over time, start to feel like history. Abstract, distant. This one never did. Maybe it's the detail of the briefcase. Maybe it's the word maruta, log, and the fact that someone chose that word deliberately, because logs don't have rights, and logs don't have names. Whatever it is, this one stayed with me. The doctor standing over you has a medical degree. He graduated top of his class. He has a family. He goes home for dinner. And right now, he is deciding which disease to inject into your bloodstream. He will never be punished for this. The United States government will make sure of that. Pingfang, Manchuria, 1936. A complex of 70 buildings spread across 1 square kilometer, officially registered as a water purification unit. No one in the surrounding villages was told what was actually being purified inside those walls. By the time the war ended, somewhere between 3,000 and 12,000 people had been killed inside. Not in battle, not by bombs, but by men with clipboards and syringes. This is the story of Unit 731, and by the end, you will understand why not a single one of its lead scientists ever stood trial in the West. General Shirō Ishii was 44 years old when he walked out of the ruins of Manchuria in August 1945, carrying a briefcase. Inside that briefcase were years of experimental data. Data purchased with human lives, gathered through methods that the Nuremberg trials, running simultaneously in Germany, would have classified as crimes against humanity. Ishii was a microbiologist, an army general, and a man with an obsession. As early as the 1920s, he had argued that biological weapons were the future of warfare. The Imperial Japanese Army agreed. They gave him funding, land, and an unlimited supply of what his staff called marutas, logs. The prisoners came from all directions. Chinese civilians rounded up in the countryside, Russian POWs, Koreans. Some had been accused of crimes, most had not. Children arrived, pregnant women arrived. They were processed, catalogued, and assigned numbers. From that moment, their names ceased to exist in any official record. The complex at Pingfang was not a makeshift operation. It employed approximately 3,000 doctors, technicians, nurses, and soldiers. It had its own railway line, its own power plant, its own prison block, referred to internally as the row building. The cells arranged so that prisoners could not stand fully upright, ensuring muscle atrophy, ensuring they remained weak. Manchuria in winter drops to -40 degrees. The summers are thick and humid, ideal for cultivating bacteria. Ishii had chosen the location carefully. He understood what he needed: isolation, infrastructure, and cold. What they did inside those buildings was systematic. Plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax, frostbite, subjects strapped outside overnight, bare and armed, until the flesh froze solid, then thawed, then frozen again, the researchers recording the results with the precision of men who believed they were advancing science. Vivisection, surgery performed on living, conscious subjects without anesthesia, because researchers believed anesthesia would contaminate results. Organ harvesting. Prisoners placed in pressure chambers until their eyes burst. None of this was hidden from the staff. Doctors rotated in and out of Unit 731 the way doctors rotate through hospital wards. Careers were built there. Promotions were awarded. Ishii received the order on a Tuesday: destroy everything. Within days, the 70 buildings were demolished. Documents were burned in the courtyards. Days of burning, the smoke visible from the surrounding towns. Staff tore the insignia from their uniforms. Ishii handed out cyanide capsules in case of capture. And then they walked out. They scattered into the chaos of Japan's defeat, becoming civilians, becoming teachers, becoming neighbors. By 1947, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, formally approved full immunity for Ishii and his subordinates. Not partial immunity, not reduced sentences, full immunity. In exchange, the data, every experiment, every result, every number attached to every human being who had passed through those buildings. In declassified memos, American military scientists described the data as an invaluable contribution to biological research, information that would have taken decades to collect under ethical conditions. Ishii moved back to the Japanese countryside. His colleagues took up posts at universities. Several rose to prominent positions in Japanese government and the medical establishment. The Soviet Union captured 12 Unit 731 members and convicted them at the 1949 Khabarovsk war crimes trials. Official American response: the U.S. dismissed the trials as communist propaganda, a show trial designed to embarrass the West. The Nuremberg Code was adopted in 1947, the same year the U.S. granted Unit 731 immunity. What nobody wants to say out loud is, the Nuremberg Code was never meant to apply equally everywhere. It was written to condemn the losers, and the Unit 731 deal proves that the winners understood exactly what they were doing when they drew that line. Declassified documents confirmed that American biological warfare programs at Fort Detrick expanded rapidly in the years following the immunity deal, incorporating methodologies developed at Pingfang. The data was not shared with the scientific community. It was classified. It went into military files. American military intelligence in 1947 was already looking ahead to biological conflict with the Soviet Union. The Cold War had not officially begun, but the calculations had. Ishii died in Tokyo in 1959 of throat cancer. He was never indicted. He was never charged. The files exist. Some are still classified. The full accounting has never come. What the United States received in that briefcase has never been fully disclosed to the public. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests are released with entire paragraphs blacked out, not redacted for national security, but for reasons the government has declined to specify. American researchers at Camp Detrick, later Fort Detrick, were simultaneously running their own biological weapons programs. The Unit 731 data gave them a decade's head start. At least 50 Unit 731 scientists took positions in Japanese pharmaceutical companies, universities, and the national public health system in the years following the war. Their credentials were never questioned. Their wartime records were sealed. Japan's government has never formally apologized for Unit 731. When the topic has been raised in the Diet, Japan's national legislature, it has been met with procedural deflection, historical ambiguity, or the argument that the records are insufficient to confirm the scale of what occurred. Chinese scholars have spent decades compiling survivor testimony, oral histories, survivor interviews, physical evidence recovered from the compound site, building a record that official governments on both sides of the Pacific have never formally validated. Survivors speak of watching family members taken, fathers, brothers, neighbors, removed by Japanese troops under the pretense of labor recruitment, never returned. Most victims have no grave, no marker, no record of their existence beyond the numbered tags that were collected back at the gate. The contrast has been noted by historians for 70 years. The same Allied powers that assembled the Nuremberg Tribunal in Germany were simultaneously negotiating immunity for men who had done equivalent and, in some cases, worse things in Asia. The Nuremberg doctors' trial convicted 7 Nazi physicians and sentenced them to death. The Unit 731 doctors attended no trial. They retired. Nuremberg, 1947. 7 Nazi doctors executed. Unit 731, same year. 0 prosecutions. Former Unit 731 researchers presented findings at international medical conferences in the 1950s and 60s. Findings derived from data obtained from human subjects, without disclosing the origin of that data. Some of that research entered the scientific literature with no indication of how it was produced. Peer reviewers saw numbers. They did not see faces. Researchers who have spent decades filing FOIA requests describe the same wall. Documents released with critical paragraphs blacked out, supporting files missing, requests for supplementary records denied on grounds that the material cannot be located. The data was taken. The crimes were known. The silence was a policy decision. Today, the Pingfang site has a museum, opened by China, not by Japan. Attendance is sparse. International awareness remains low. Inside the museum, a numbered prisoner tag sits in a glass case. No one knows whose number it was. No one knows their name. That is the point. 1959. Ishii dies at home. 1949. Khabarovsk convictions ignored by the West. 2025. New archives released in Japan, 80 years later. In 2025, Japan's National Archives released a new tranche of wartime documents previously withheld, confirming human experimentation programs ran at sites beyond Pingfang across multiple regions of occupied Asia. Pingfang was not an isolated program. It was the largest, but researchers now believe the system was distributed, dozens of sites, hundreds of participating personnel. The revised estimates produced by recent scholarship push the total number of victims far above the original figures Western governments accepted. The 2025 archive release confirmed what historians had argued for decades. The government knew. The orders came from above. The question of imperial authorization, how far up the command chain the orders reached, has never been resolved in a court of law, because no court was ever convened. No Unit 731 defendant ever sat in a Western courtroom. That chair was never filled. The formal U.S. military recommendation internal and now partially declassified, concluded that prosecution would not serve American strategic interests. Justice in the post-war world was not blind. It was geopolitical. It went where the power wanted it to go and stopped exactly where power told it to stop. The Cold War hadn't officially started. The deal was already done. By 1948, American biological warfare strategists had already incorporated aerosolized pathogen dispersal models, models that required human exposure data of the kind only Unit 731 had generated. The people in those suits today, the researchers working on pandemic preparedness, on biological defense, are working in a field whose foundations were partly built on crimes that were never prosecuted. That is not a metaphor. Specific methodologies developed and tested at Ping Fong, plague dispersal, frostbite modeling, hemorrhagic fever progression, entered the research pipeline through the immunity deal. Every year, families travel to Harbin to leave flowers at the site. For most of them, there is no body to return to, no grave to visit. They are mourning a number, mourning an absence. The children who come to the museum today will grow up knowing what happened here. Whether the governments responsible ever formally acknowledge it, that is still an open question. No United Nations resolution on Unit 731 has ever been passed. The topic has never formally come before the Security Council. The historians who have spent careers on this material share one frustration. The evidence is not missing. The crimes are documented. The obstruction is the story. Somewhere inside a building like this, in Washington, in Tokyo, in a vault with a combination none of us know, the full record exists. Each number on those plaques was a person who had a name, who had a family, who was taken, used, and discarded by a system that was then protected by the most powerful nation on earth. There was no trial, there was no reckoning, there was a deal and a silence and a classified file in a vault somewhere, and the people in those buildings had no say in any of it. If you believe accountability should have no expiration date, then the question isn't whether this happened. We know it happened. The question is, why are we still the only ones asking? These stories don't trend. They don't get pushed by algorithms. If you think accountability shouldn't have an expiration date, subscribe, because the next one is worse. We still don't know the full contents of what Ishii handed over in that briefcase, and the files that would tell us are still partially locked behind classification stamps that nobody in power seems in a hurry to lift. What we do know is that the immunity deal didn't end with Unit 731. It set a template. And the next story I'm going to tell you follows that template to one of the darkest places the Cold War ever went. Because if governments were willing to protect the men who did this, what were they willing to do themselves?